And this is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. If you can hear that, my apologies. If you can't hear it, yay! Yeah. Stage 1, Chapter 1, Marley's Ghost. Marley had carped, that's for sure. His death certificate was signed by the clergyman, the doctor, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. That was Scrooge. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Though what is particularly dead about a doornail, I do not know. I reckon a coffin nail might be more dead myself, but who am I to change the narrative? Well, apparently I have. Just a little bit. Makes it easy to read and listen to. I digress. However you look at it, Marley was dead. He'd carved it, cactus, toast. Well and truly. You must be convinced of this. Marley and Scrooge had been partners for donkey's years, and neither had anybody in their lives other than the other. Scrooge was Marley's only friend, only confidant, his only business partner, the only executor to his will, his only anything. But even as best mates and workmates, Scrooge was not so cut up over his death that he wasn't able to make a deal on a rather cheap coffin and an even cheaper funeral. Scrooge was truly a tightwad. I wanted to say something else there, but, YouTube. You must all be convinced beyond a doubt that Marley was definitely dead, or nothing about this story will seem amazing at all. So keep that in mind. Marley was definitely dead. I'm guessing because the chapter's actually called Marley's Ghost, we, probably should have picked up on that a little while ago, but Dickens wanted us to know Marley was dead. Now, Scrooge was so stingy and tight that he never painted out Marley's name from the signboard that swung outside his office window. So new people to his business sometimes called Scrooge Scrooge, and they sometimes called him Marley. He didn't care. He answered to both. It was all the same to me. He was a tightwad. No doubt about it. He was a wretched, squeezing, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old codger, as hard as flint, but yet too stingy to let any steel give out a spark from which a fire might freely light. Perhaps if he had been paid. The cold had frozen his features. It nipped at his pointy nose. It shrunk his cheeks like a cheap wool in a hot wash. See what I did there? Turned his thin lips blue and made his eyes bloodshot. When he spoke, which was not often, it was with a grasping, raspy voice that would make nails down a chalkboard seem pleasant to the ear. Frost, ice, and snow rested on his head, his bobhawk eyebrows. Probably should have said the other guy. He had really bushy eyebrows too, but I Australianified it. And his witch-like chin. He carried this temperature about with him all year. always with him. Even through spring and summer, his offices didn't warm one bit. So there was little difference between then and Christmas, temperature-wise, in his workplace. External temperatures had no effect on him. No warmth warmed him. No chilly chill cooled him. No wind that blew was more bitter. No snow colder. And no pelting rain less relentless than he. The heaviest rain of rain and snow did at least look pretty when it fell. Scrooge never did, unless it was down a flight of stairs. I added that bit. He had no mates. Nobody stopped him in the street to say, "G'day, old codger, how's things? You're going to come over for a beer soon," and a nana. Nana, not a nana. No street beggars even asked a coin of him. No busker sang a tune in hopes of he might toss a penny into his hat. He scared kids. They'd rather an ear bashing from Mum than to ask Scrooge what time it was so that they wouldn't be late. No man nor woman in all his life asked him for directions to anywhere. Scrooge didn't give a flying fig, though, what they thought. He liked how people moved out of his way when they came through the streets on his way to work. Once upon a time, that's how all good stories should start. On Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat in his office, busy screwing people out of the hard-earned money. Outside was bitterly cold. He could hear people rushing past his window, wheezing, clapping their frozen hands against their thick mittens to try and warm them as they stomped their feet on the cobbles to improve blood circulation, hoping some blood might bring heat. The clock had just struck 3, but it was already dark, and had been most of the day. Candles flickered in windows of neighbouring offices, and now grew dimmer as the fog rolled in. Scrooge kept his office door open, in order just to keep an eye on his solitary employee, who, unlike the other offices around, had but a single candle lit to work by. Scrooge had a very small fire in his office, but his one employee's fire appeared to be even smaller. Just one burning coal. Had the employee tried to retrieve from Scrooge's office another piece of coal, he would have been glared at and asked by Scrooge if it was not time for him to be given the sack. Thus, his clerk tried in vain to warm himself at the candle, but he had not enough imagination for that, and he failed. Suddenly, Scrooge was interrupted by a handsome young man in his outer office, who very soon was in his own office. Sparkling bright eyes, red cheeks from being in the bitter cold, and a fog poured out of his mouth as he spoke. "Merry Christmas, Uncle," said his nephew Fred. Scrooge, unamused, replied, "Bah, humbug." "Oh, Christmas a humbug. I'm sure you don't mean it." "I definitely do." "Christmas? Merry Christmas? What reason have you to be merry?" "How can you be merry? You're broke." Not to be outdone, his nephew replied, "How can you be such a miserable old fart? You're rich enough." "Bah, humbug again, I say," came Scrooge's only retort. "Oh, don't be cranky, Uncle. Why not, said Scrooge. I live in a world full of idiots who all go around greeting each other with Merry Christmas this and Merry Christmas that. It holds no meaning, especially for you. It's just another day in which you haven't made any money for yourself. If I had my way, every drongo who goes about wishing people a Merry Christmas should be made to box naked with a kangaroo and buried with a stick of holly through their heart. Oh, Uncle, pleaded Fred. Scrooge mocked back. Oh, nephew, celebrate Christmas in your way, and I'll celebrate it in mine. But you don't celebrate it, said Fred. Crikey, then let me leave it alone. Much good it does anybody. Much good it has done you, said Scrooge. Fred replied rather thoughtfully. There's tons of things I haven't profited from, but have still gained goodness from, Christmas being among them. Christmas is a time for being good and generous. It's a time for forgiving, being kind, charitable, and for celebrating baby Jesus. Scrooge is just about to say bah humbug again, but thought better of it. It's the only time of year that we are all so cheerful that we forget our problems. We smile at strangers, and we become one race and nation. It's true it has not put any money in my pocket, but I believe it has and does do me good every year. Cratchit in the outer office applauded, but stopped suddenly when Scrooge's stern gaze fell upon him. Make another sound, Cratchit, and you'll be on the dole queue before the day's end. Then to Fred he said, you should go into politics. You're about as full as gas as any of them. Oh, don't be mad, said Fred. Come and have Christmas lunch with me and the missus. Why? Why not? And Scrooge changed the subject. Why did you get married? Fred said, because I fell in love. Love, snorted Scrooge, as though it was the only thing more stupid than a Merry Christmas. Poor Fred. He was exasperated, but he continued. I don't want anything from you. Why can't we be mates? Good afternoon, nephew, said Scrooge. I have no fight with you that I am aware of. I've come in the spirit of Christmas and will not lose the spirit. So again I say Merry Christmas to you, Uncle. Good afternoon, nephew. Scrooge was left pondering until Fred shouted out over his shoulder, and a Happy New Year! As he passed Cratchit, he wished him a Merry Christmas also. Cratchit returned the warm greeting before quickly returning him, to his work in case Scrooge saw him. Under his breath, Scrooge was heard muttering, there's another one, always Merry Christmasing people. My clerk, a wife, a family, and barely 2 pennies to rub together. Bedlam. Tangent. Bedlam was a lunatic asylum, and it was called Bedlam. We actually derive the word Bedlam, which means chaos and lunacy, from the lunatic asylum called Bedlam, not the other way around. Just thought that was a curious thing to mention. Anyway, I digress. As Fred left, he had let in 2 very businesslike gentlemen who had pen and paper in their hands, and they greeted Scrooge. Which Which one are you, Scrooge or Marley? One of them asked, indicating the sign that hung outside the window. Marley has been dead 7 years tonight, said Scrooge. The other man handed them their credentials and continued where the other had left off. Well, I have no doubt that his generosity will be well represented by his surviving partner. Scrooge cringed at the idea of being generous. We are collecting for the poor, as it is at this time of year that they feel the need most, and it is also when those who have an abundance are most willing to give. Many thousands, hundreds of thousands, are in need. Are there no prisons? Asked Scrooge. Plenty. No workhouses or treadmills. Those are still in existence, I'm afraid, and yes, very busy. Glad to hear it. Then they should go there, said Scrooge. The places you speak of are not exactly filled with Christmas spirit. They offer no Christian cheer, warmth, meat, or drink. We are asking those with an abundance to make a monetary gift. What shall I put you down for? Nothing, said Scrooge. Ah, said the second man, you wish to remain anonymous. Not a problem, mate. No, I wish to be left alone. I do not celebrate Christmas and cannot afford to make idle dole-bludgers merry. Let them go to the establishments that my taxes pay for that I previously mentioned. Many can't go there, and many would rather die, said the first man again. Well then, if they'd rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Anyway, how am I to know about that? You might know it if you asked, replied the first man, who was now becoming quite annoyed. It's none of my business. I have enough to deal with running my own business to stick my nose in the affairs of others. Good afternoon. The two gentlemen gave up. They could see that they were not going to get anything from Scrooge based on his preconceptions and beliefs. Scrooge noticed as they left it become even darker outside, and the fog, the fog? No, you two, that's not that word that you think it is. The fog had become so thick that in some were now offering, I'll try that again. And the fog had become so thick that some were now offering to light the way for pedestrians and carriages using their flaring links so they could find their way, so they could find their destinations. I don't know why I had such trouble with that sentence. I wrote it. You'd think I hadn't. But anyway, let's continue, shall we? The nearby church's bell continued to chime away the afternoon into evening, 1 hour at a time. The weather became more intense, and on a nearby corner, some gas pipe workers had set up a brazier. They'd filled it with fuel, and it burned a brilliant fire. The ragged men and boys of the street gathered around to warm themselves without the usual shouts of "Sod off, you lazy bums." It was Christmas. All the other shops and offices except Scrooge's had increased the number of candles burnt, so much so that it made the cheeks of passers-by glow red. The poulterers and the grocers were making money hand over fist, selling last-minute Christmas food, drink, and gifts. The Lord Mayor had as all Lord Mayors before him, gave his 50 cooks and butlers orders to assist to keep Christmas by allowing his staff and his facilities be used for the poor to prepare and cook their Christmas food. It had become so dark, cold and foggy that one young red-nosed kid who might have been mistaken for a skeleton didn't notice the name above the door, or he might have thought twice. He bent down to the keyhole of Scrooge's office and began to sing. God bless ye, weary gentlemen, may nothing you dismay. Scrooge grabbed his ruler from his desk and with a burst of energy rushed to the door, scaring the kid off. It was soon closing time, and Scrooge left his desk and office. He seemed even more ill-willed than normal, if that was at all possible, as he addressed his clerk. I suppose you will be taking the whole day tomorrow. Well, yes, sir, if that's okay. It is not okay, nor is it fair. If I stopped your wages for it, you'd whinge about being used. But nobody thinks I'm being used when I have to pay a day's wage for no work. Cratchit smiled. It's just one day a year. It hardly makes it excusable for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. Scrooge buttoned up his thick, warm overcoat as Cratchit wrapped his scarf around him in vain to try and keep out the cold. He couldn't afford an overcoat. I expect to see you here even earlier the next morning, said Scrooge. Scrooge's look told Cratchit he was not playing around, and he nodded vigorously to let Scrooge know that he would be there bright and early. They parted ways. Cratchit went home. Scrooge went to his usual place to eat his usual sad little meal at the same sad little pub that he always did before going home to bed. He lived in a gloomy house, a large building with abundant rooms that he had let out as offices. It was Marley's old home, which came to Scrooge after Marley's death. Nobody but Scrooge lived there. Nobody but Scrooge would want to live there. It was now so dark that when Scrooge arrived, despite him knowing, he got there eventually, every stone and flagstone, he was forced to feel his way through the courtyard to the door. Upon reaching the door, Scrooge placed his key in the lock when he noticed something peculiar about the large knocker. No longer was it the roaring head of a lion made in iron, but it was Marley's face. It looked just as it had always looked to Scrooge. His specs were turned up and resting on his forehead as its eyes stared open, motionless, except for the occasional stirring in a breeze. His hair, a breeze Scrooge could not feel. Then, just as suddenly, the face became the knocker again, and Scrooge turned the key and entered the building. He checked behind the door, though, before closing it, to see if at the back of the knocker there was Marley's pigtail that he used to wear. There wasn't, just nuts and bolts. This did unsettle him, though, and he said, "Oh, pish," and shut the door so soundly behind him that it was slammed shut with such force that it rang out throughout the building. It was at that point Scrooge, who had reached the top of the stairs, thought he saw a hearse, but he didn't give it a second's thought. However, this did not stop him from making a thorough room-to-room search of his small suite. He checked under tables, chairs, beds, behind closets, and even his dressing gown, which he thought hung suspiciously as though someone were in it. Satisfied that he was quite alone, he closed the door to his bedroom and bolted it twice. Something he never did. He removed his cravat, put on his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and sat himself in front of a small fire in a fire grate, decorated with fine blue-white Delftware. Not his addition. They were placed there by a previous owner, a Dutch merchant. As he tried to garner some warmth from the fire, he rested his head back in the chair. His gaze fell upon a bell, a disused, silent bell, hanging on the wall, for he lived in what used to be the servants' quarters. Scarcely believing his eyes, it began to swing, as did the bell next to it and the one next to that. For a full minute, the bells in all the building rang ferociously. Then, stopping dead, they were silent again. Scrooge could now hear the distant sound of a dragging chain, much like he had heard in ghost stories told to him by others. Before too long, he could hear the chain dragging up the stairs, coming closer and closer to his room. It stopped outside before entering through the door. Scrooge saw a white waistcoated man with tights and boots wrapped in a heavy chain that he was dragging with a pigtail. Attached to the chain were cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, and deeds. It was Marley. "What do you want?" asked Scrooge. "Much," said Marley. "Can you take a seat?" "I can." "Then do it." Marley was convinced that Scrooge was not convinced. "You don't believe in me? Why do you doubt your own senses?" "No, I do not believe in what I am seeing," Scrooge said. "Any number of slight disorders can make one's mind play tricks. See this toothpick." He held up a toothpick. "I do," said Marley, staring straight ahead without looking. "Well," replied Scrooge, not convinced he had seen the toothpick, "if I swallowed it, I would see goblins and ghouls for the rest of my days, or my own mind's creation." He paused and looked at Marley. "You could be an undigested bit of beef or an underdone potato. There is more of gravy than of grave about you." Scrooge didn't usually make jokes, or just as well. So this is probably indicating just how worried he was. He needed to put himself at ease with a funny little jape. Marley, unimpressed with Scrooge's little joke, shook his chain and screamed a terrifying scream that caused Scrooge to cling to his chair with fear that he might swoon. Scrooge fell to his knees, clasped his hands as if in prayer. "Why do you trouble me? Do you believe in me now?" "Yes," confessed Scrooge. "I must, but tell me, why do you walk the earth? Why are you here now?" Marley tried to explain. "It is a requirement that in order to pass on to heaven after death, that every man's spirit should walk amongst his fellows men and travel far and wide. If the spirit does not go forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death, forever. To wander the earth and witness what it can no longer share, unable to help those who need it most, and hopefully return them to happiness. It is our punishment. It is our torture. To gaze upon poor wretched souls, but not have the power to change their fortunes, as we once could have done and should have done in life." Again, Marley let out a scream and shook his chain. "Why are you fettered?" asked Scrooge. "I wear the chain I made in life. Link by link, I built it. Each time I neglected to help, when I was able to, my chain became longer and heavier. I built it freely. It was of my own free will. Is it strange to you?" Scrooge just trembled. "Or would you like to know that the weight and length of your chain was as long and as heavy as this 7 Christmases ago, and you have labored on it since? It is a ponderous chain." Scrooge said, pleaded, "Please tell me some good news." "I have none to give," said Marley. "That is to come from others. It's to come from other sources. I can only tell you what I am permitted to reveal. I cannot stay or linger anywhere anymore, because my spirit never walked beyond our counting house. When alive, it must do so now, never ceasing." Probably more in an effort to make himself feel better, Scrooge said, "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob." "Business?" Again, Marley shook his chain and screamed. "Mankind should have been my business. The common welfare should have been my business. Charity, mercy, and good was my business. Yet I ignored it all. I suffer most at this time of year. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them up to that blessed star which led the 3 wise men to the poorest of abodes? There were plenty of homes it might have led me to, had I looked." Scrooge was really shaking at this point, terrified. "My time is nearly up," he said to Scrooge. Hear me, Ebenezer. I will, Jacob. I cannot tell you why you can see me today. I have sat many times at your side in our old office since my death, watching you, hoping you would see me. This sort of unsettled Scrooge. I've been permitted to come here tonight to warn you that there is a chance to escape my fate. Ah, said Scrooge, you're always a good friend to me, Jacob. Thank you. You will be haunted by 3 ghosts. Scrooge said, well, is that the chance you speak of? It is. Then I'd rather not be bothered, said Scrooge. Without them you have no chance to escape the fate which already awaits you. Expect the first tonight when the bell tolls 1. Could they all come at once and be done with it? I'd rather that, said Scrooge. Expect the second on the second night at the same hour. The final spirit will show itself before the last stroke of midnight on the 3rd night. I am off. I have to go, but don't forget what I have said. Scrooge watched Marley move towards the window, backwards, and beckoning him as he did so. Scrooge followed until Jacob opened the window and signaled for him to come no closer. Pointing outside the window, Jacob flew through it into the darkness. Scrooge looked out the window to see the air filled with phantoms, all in chains of differing lengths, sizes, and weights. He recognized many of them. One man in particular, a good man of business with a white waistcoat, was crying piteously over a wretched woman with a baby in her arms. She was freezing cold, starving and close to death, much as was the child she held. Scrooge could see the source of their misery was clear. Just as Jacob explained, they sought now to intervene in human nature for good, but had lost the ability to do so. Had lost the ability to do what they once could have done and should have done. Soon, the phantoms vanished. Scrooge checked the bedroom door, still double locked. Exhausted by the events of that evening, he fell soundly asleep. That's the end of chapter 1. I'll return tomorrow with chapter 2. Take care. Don't get too scared now. Bye for now, people. Thanks for watching.